Hello, and welcome to the Poison Paint Factory. My factory designated name is Poison226. Nice to meet you. It was Friday, 5:05, and I was still in the office. The boss was really busting my balls about some slip-up I'd made. Seems like calling Jimmy the Snitch while he was in an undercover sting. Well, he always liked aquariums. Now he got to sleep with the fishes. And I got the cases no one else wanted to touch. The call came and I cut him off with a finger to the lips. This is important, boss. I gotta take this. No you don't, 226, he said perturbed. But I picked it up anyway. HELL.O, you're through to 226, private eye, investigation extraordinaire. What you want? Is this 226? Came a voice of a timid little missy. Good God, one of those, I thought. Didn't I already tell him? But instead I said, speaking, what you want? Oh well, there's a man, a Punisher man who's after me. I need help. Good. I could do with a payday, and this Punisher man sounds like just the ticket I needed to stop smoking these candy sticks and actually pick up the real deal. Yeah, I said with the honey drip smoothness you get from a Winnie the Pooh story. Help is my specialty. The boss realised I wasn't playing him any heed and left, slamming the door to my office closed with all the force of a rabid cockapoo. I know. That's what it said on your business card, she quivered. Leave it with me. I'll find out what I can about this creep and get back to you. Damn, I really need to start asking names and numbers when doing business. Today, I'm going to find out everything I can about this Punisher character. I said to no one in particular. I look around as if I can hear the dub. And I'm going to see what makes him tick, where he came from and whatever else. I continued to ramble. Shut up, whoever you are! And from this point, your humble narrator, seriously, Ray, it's happening again! Today, I want to talk about the Punisher. Come with me as I scour Marvel Comics' dark underbelly, looking for the mob-killing man, the Marvel with a machine gun, the one-man army who is not John Rambo, the Punisher. Disclaimer, the information presented in this video is public information that I researched alongside my interpretation and opinions. Sources will be linked in the description and yes, there will be spoilers. I wonder if there's a link between the subject of the last video and this. What could link the Punisher with Silent Hill's Pyramid Head? So, with all that said, let's get to it. Who is the Punisher? The Punisher looks like this, or even this. Clad in all black with the iconic white skull design across his chest, the Punisher cuts an imposing figure. Often carrying enough weapons and pouches even Rob Liefeld would blush at. The Punisher is as deadly as they come. He's a Caucasian Italian-American with black hair and a big pumped physique. But he's had story arcs with different physiques, skin colours, turned him into a robot, and even a monster. The Punisher's real-life identity is Frankcastle, but was born Francis Castiglione. He was created by Gerry Conway as writer and John Romita Sr. and Ross Andru as artists, and debuted in the comic world in February 1974. Originally, he was a hitman hired by the villainous Jackal to take out Spider-Man. Frank had been told that Spider-Man was a criminal, but when Frank actually encountered Spider-Man, he realised Spidey wasn't all that bad. He'd been tricked by the Jackal and decided not to go ahead with the hit. Originally, Conway was going to call him the Assassin, but Stan Lee suggested to go with the Punisher, and thankfully the name stuck. Excuse me. Speaking, it's Gerry Conway, the creator of the Punisher. I'm trying to hunt down the Punisher. What can you tell me of him?
The Punisher's view of the world is a simple one. There are good people and there are bad people, and the bad people deserve to die. I think in the Punisher's worldview, redemption isn't possible.
Sure, Mr. Conway, but what can you tell me about his creation?
I sketched the basic Punisher costume design with a small skull on his chest and a black jumpsuit and brought it to John Rambo. I wanted a character whose primary colours would reflect his basic attitude on life. The world is black and white, light and dark, quick and dead.
So what about the costume? Did John Rambo create the Punisher's look?
John played around with the sketch and came up with the terrific notion that the Punisher's belt be part of his skull's jaw. That's a pretty good example of artistic collaboration. John springboarding from my crude little sketch and doing things I would never have done.
And then what?
The sketch was given back to Ross Andrew with the full script for that issue. He added the hawk-like face, the body build, the physical tension to the character, but it all started with that crude little sketch, I guess.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Conway. Our man, Frank, is what they call an anti-hero. Really, all this means is he's a hero if he's on your side, and a villain if he's not. He does bad things to bad people. He's got a brutal mean streak born of rage following the death of his wife and 2 children. Frank was a family man once, and the death of his loved ones is the driving force that has governed what he's been doing for the past 50-something years, cleaning up the streets one low-life thug or gangster at a time. What makes Frank so compelling to me is that he's a hero who doesn't have any superpowers to speak of. He has an indomitable spirit and will never give up when innocence needs avenging and evil deserves punishment. Conway cites the novel The Executioner as the largest inspiration for the Punisher's characteristics. There are a few variations of Frank's origin, but generally he fought in the war, be it Nam, Iraq or other, as appropriate at the time of printing. He has a great understanding of warfare and military strategy, and has a high proficiency with most weapons, be it guns, blades or unarmed. His most notable aspects in the comic is the skull motif that is featured on all his costumes. Usually this can be found on top of a Kevlar vest, to supposedly draw fire away from more vital areas. But he's also been seen with either a skull mask or face paint, so his costume has remained pretty consistent over the years, where it has been updated only to fit with the current times and trends. The white gloves and boots changed out for more appropriate black combat boots or a long black trench coat, but sometimes there would be something crazy happen at Marvel and they would come out with something like this. I won't go into too much detail today, but Frank Castle isn't the only person to wear the moniker of the Punisher. Jake Gallows was the Punisher in the year 2099. In one timeline, there's a Peter Parker of Earth 71928 who became the Punishing Spider to get revenge on Uncle Ben's murderer. There's been a couple of female Punishers and even a family of Punishers from the What If comic series. Obviously, there will be more out there who are a step removed, like Hitman, who wore a similar costume to Frank when Frank was perceived dead. What I'm saying is, this isn't an exhaustive list, or I'd be here all day. Frank hasn't only been known as the Punisher though. He used the alias Mr. Smith, and was the second War Machine taking over when James Rhodes was killed in the second superhero Civil War. Not to mention when Frank took on the Captain America uniform in his own way. There've been a lot of different mashups with the Punisher in the What If comics too. Some of these, in no particular order: Venom Punisher, Iron Man Punisher, Caveman Punisher, Punisher Noir, which technically is Frank's son Frank Jr., Frankcastle. Yes, that is a Frankenstein-inspired Punisher. Cowboy Punisher, Cosmic Ghost Rider. Yeah, that's our Frank. Oh, and what do you get when you run out of ideas? Well, obviously you go to space! Speaking of random versions of the Punisher and Frank, there was a time in the 90s where Marvel didn't know what to do with the character. Everything needed to be edgy and dark. And well, how can you make the Punisher more dark and edgy? Make him supernatural, kill him, resurrect him, and have him collaborate with angels, of course. I mean, it's not really that bad of a concept, but maybe it should have been used for a different character. Most people seem to love the Punisher for how it's minimal on the theatrics of spandex and superpowers, and more grounded in a street-level crime world. This leads nicely into which are my favourite Punisher comics. The Punisher has been in comics for over 5 decades now, so there's plenty of stories to choose from. In his early days, he was quite an abnormality due to his excessive violence and lack of compassion and mercy, but he was soon just one of the many troubled anti-heroes battling their psychological and sometimes physical demons. Because of him being a bit of a grey area when it comes to heroes and villains, Marvel were reluctant to give him his own series. So reluctant, in fact, it took 12 years. Ironically, the story had been drafted by Stephen Grant a decade prior. Stephen had this to say on his interpretation of the Punisher. He knows the difference between right and wrong, and he does know what he's doing is wrong. He also feels it must be done. To the extent of him being a hero, I see him as a tragic hero. He knows that no matter how many criminals he kills, others will rise to fill the ranks. The implication in the limited series is that he knows he cannot win the war, but he still has to go out and fight the battle, because that's the only way he can live with himself. To that extent, he is a hero because he is fighting a lost cause. Punisher is no stranger to a team-up either, despite his generally solitary preference. There have been some interesting clashes between the Punisher's ideologies and that of his story partner. Usually, the Punisher and the hero start at two different points, with the Punisher wanting to put a permanent end to the villain in question, and the hero trying to stop him. This will usually end up with them working together to beat the big bad, and go their separate ways after, agreeing to disagree. Obviously, personal tastes are different, and this is in no way meant to be a definitive guide to which stories to read, but if you do feel a little overwhelmed about where to start, or just want some guidance based on my opinions, here's a couple of story arcs worth checking out. I have to start with Welcome Back Frank. It's a no-brainer. Coming off the back of one of the Punisher's lowest runs, there was a lot for Ennis and Dillon to overcome with their run. They needed to send a message to the fans, and send a message they did. Ennis said, "Regarding the recent Angel stories, I propose that we all but ignore these, getting any reference to them out of the way pronto." So at the end of issue 1, the Punisher celebrates his return by flinging a high-profile mob boss off the top of the Empire State Building. For the next issue, to the arc's conclusion, throwing the mobster off the building haunts Frank. Not in a conscience sense, but he has now been hunted by the mob and the police. Detective Soap and Buddy Plug, a behavioural psychologist, are given the task of bringing the Punisher to justice. But since the police are quite happy for Frank to do their job for them, the duo are set up to fail from the start. Buddy is, indisposed, and so Soap is joined by his new partner, Molly. Ma Ganucci sends gang after Frank to bring him down, to no avail. Even when she loses her limbs to a polar bear attack, she's just as terrifying as ever, and also sets up the greatest Star Wars reference in comics. The B-plot to the story is of a group of vigilantes who are all inspired by what the Punisher is doing, and go about dealing out their brand of justice. It's interesting and brave of Ennis, in my opinion, to not shy away from holding a mirror up to Frank and show him in a less than positive light. The Punisher does bad things to bad people, right? Well, it's all about morals. One of the vigilantes calls himself Elite, and has taken it upon himself to deal out justice to preserve a nice neighbourhood. Unfortunately, this means the same punishment for drug dealers as people who allow their dogs to foul on the street: death. This really proves that what Punisher does is only good if you agree with his morals, and shows how little grey area he allows. In my opinion, this is a must-read. The story is beautifully paced and stands true to its guns. It is bloody, darkly humorous, and makes you really consider what good actually means. Writer Becky Cloonan sums up this arc best when she says, "Chances are if the Punisher is coming after you, you've got no one to blame but yourself. If you are a criminal, the Punisher is basically Jason Voorhees. As with Jason or the shark from Jaws, they are always there in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. This is Frank in the Cloonan-Dillon run. Most of the book is following either Olaf, a bad guy who is maybe working on the inside to bring down the mob, or Ortiz and Henderson, who are DEA, who are trying to take down the mob through the regular, lawful channels. If the Punisher gets in their way, well, they'll have to take him down too. Frank, on the other hand, is generally one step in front of the law and one step behind the unlawful. It is a great story with nice art. If you've already read Welcome Back Frank, read this next." I read this, don't waste your time. I couldn't stand the art style, and the story was way too goofy for me. At least too goofy for a Punisher story for me anyway. Aliens, Craven Jr.'s animal villains menagerie. No thank you. In researching The Punisher, I read Civil War, Shadowland, and Moon Knight Down South, because I remember the Punisher being in them, and that he had a pivotal role in the story. For what it's worth, all of these are great, and Frank is featured in them. He even does some important stuff, but when boiled down, there's not much to say about his appearance in them. All recommendations, but more because they are great stories, less because Frank's in them. I've been told that Punisher Born is one of the best Punisher stories, but unfortunately, this is one I've not managed to get round to reading. Hopefully, if I'm able to do a part 2 about Punisher down the line, I'll include my opinions on it there. Sorry about that. Rule of thumb when it comes to Punisher, anything written by Garth Ennis or drawn by Steve Dillon is golden. Nuff said. Once Marvel Studios started putting their top characters on the big screen, it was only a matter of time until we got to see a live-action Punisher in action. In fact, Frank has featured in 3 feature-length films and 2 seasons of a TV show, each with 13 episodes. Not forgetting his central appearance in the Daredevil Netflix series Season 2 and other random appearances. Let's take a quick look at these on-screen appearances and see how well Frank has taken to the Hollywood life. This movie is set in a time when the Punisher has been causing chaos for a few years, and whilst there are rumours that Frank is the Punisher, there's no proof. The film changes some of the origin story and doesn't even feature the iconic skull logo on his chest. We don't see the origin of Frank becoming the Punisher in real time, but instead we see a few flashbacks showing a car bomb killing his family that was intended for him. Since Frank is presumed dead, following this incident anyway, he dons the Punisher identity and lives in the sewers, dishing out his version of justice against those deserving. The main plot is about warring gang factions that Punisher gets wrapped up in when innocent children of the Mafia are taken hostage. Despite their parents' crimes, to the Punisher, the children are victims and deserve to be saved. Frank goes to save the kids, and even works with a mafioso called Franco to save the mobster's son from the Yakuza. Unfortunately, and to no one's surprise, Frank is double-crossed. Franco is killed right in front of his son's eyes, and as penance, Punisher puts a gun to his own head and encourages the son to shoot. The son wants to pull the trigger, but can't bring himself to do it. Before Punisher leaves, he warns the boy if he grows up to be as bad as his father, he will be waiting for him. Predominantly based on the comic stories from the 1994 miniseries The Punisher Year 1 and the 2000-2001 miniseries Welcome Back Frank. This film is considered a reboot to the 1989 movie, but this time we see the origin in real time. Frank works for the FBI and is on his final undercover mission before retirement. During the bust, there are several deaths, one of which is the son of predominant gangster and mafia boss, Howard Saint. Howard orders his men to find those responsible, and then slaughters Frank's family as revenge. Frank tries to save his kin, but ultimately fails. Howard's men beat and shoot Frank before setting the dock on fire. Frank is blown into the water and presumed dead. Guess what? They were wrong. Dead wrong. Carrying the heavy burden of survivor's guilt and driven by thoughts of revenge, Frank is reborn as the Punisher and sets about delivering his vengeance on Howard Saint and his family. What follows is fine enough, but essentially middling action thriller. Frank is both cool, calm and collected, as well as cunning, brutal and vicious. The main plot is Frank's revenge, ending with him successfully manipulating Howard into killing his best friend and wife, before Frank kills him along with his only other living son. There's also a B-plot as Frank develops something close to a friendship with his neighbours. This plot shows that Frank still has a caring side, despite his insistence on closing down his emotions and being an isolated rogue vigilante. I appreciate Dave dropping the Spacker moniker for the film, so that's good. Interesting fact, during the fight with The Russian, played by wrestling superstar Kevin Nash, a stunt coordinator forgot to change the prop, so Thomas legitimately stabbed Kevin in the collarbone during the scene. Kevin did not break character, grinning, and just continued with the scene. Legend. This canonically makes Hulk Hogan's finger poke of doom more lethal than being stabbed by a knife. Nice. A planned sequel was discussed, with Thomasjane set to reprise his role, but he and the director left the project due to creative differences. Interestingly, Jane reprised his role in the short Dirty Laundry in 2012. In this, Frank is going to the laundromat and sees a pimp getting rough with some prostitutes. Frank doesn't take too kindly to this behaviour, goes to a convenience store, picks up a bottle of whiskey and beats the ever-loving fudge out of the guy. Once he's down, Frank pours the contents of the bottle on him and lights him. The short is 10 minutes long and features Ron Perlman, in case you need any other reasons to watch it. This film is yet another reboot, but it goes back to the 1989 method of having the Punisher already established. It's also loosely based on the comic of the same name. The film opens with a brutal sequence, with Frank picking off many mobsters as if he's in a Tarantino movie. One such mobster is Billy the Beaut Rissotti, who ends up in a glass crushing machine. He survives, but suffers horrific disfigurement and becomes Jigsaw. During this same opening battle, Frank inadvertently kills an undercover FBI agent. This becomes a significant factor for the rest of the film as Frank suffers huge guilt. Like the '89 movie, we start to see through flashbacks how the Punisher lost his family. Frank is ready to retire from being the Punisher, but when he learns that the agent's wife and daughter are in danger, he agrees to one final mission. Unfortunately for Frank, the justice system fails again, and Jigsaw and his brother James walk free with full immunity, after they agree to throw an even bigger gangster under the bus. The final act of the film focuses on Jigsaw and James, who kidnap Frank's arms dealer, the widow and daughter, and challenge Frank to come and trade his life for theirs. Unknown to Frank, Jigsaw has also recruited nearly every other gang in the city and convinced them to come together so they can kill the Punisher. Frank storms the building and more brutal combat ensues. At the final showdown, Frank is forced to choose between his friend or the widow and daughter. He makes his choice and brutally kills Jigsaw, ending the conflict once and for all. Warzone is much more brutal than the '04 Punisher, but is more like the '89 movie, with the high body count and multiple gangs in the storyline. In their own way, each actor was a great casting choice and brought something different to the film and to the character of Punisher. Stevenson cuts an imposing figure, mad, bad and brutal. But, like with thomasjane, he has an emotional layer to him, a softer side, something which Dolph, by comparison, did not have. He is probably the least emotional Punisher, and only shows his morals through action by saving the children and killing the bad adults, showing us his perception of good and bad. Funnily enough, each movie is very much of its time. If you like 80s and 90s movies, go watch the '89 Punisher movie. It's got that cheese factor, the story is a typical affair, and the acting, well, that's a mixed bag. But it was fun and never outstayed its welcome, clocking in at 1 hour 29 minutes. The '04 Punisher has the most cohesive script, but had a very 2000s comic book feel to it. The Russian, albeit entertaining, felt like they stuck visually close to the original in the comic, at their detriment in my opinion. I'm glad they didn't have Nash put on a Russian accent. I appreciate them sparing us that. For me, this was the most entertaining movie, even if it was for the wrong reasons sometimes. Travolta's character was Marganucci, from the Welcome Home Frank comic. And personally, he makes and breaks the film with his performance. For what it's worth, he seems to hit his stride about the midpoint of the movie. Really, he's probably the biggest influence on me recommending this to someone or not. If you like Travolta, watch this. If you don't, my guy, keep away from this one. Finally, Warzone felt like it was about 20 minutes too long. The acting was fairly solid, particularly Stevenson, but I absolutely could not stand the Looney Bin Jim character. He was like the one 10-year-old in class who ate their weight in blue Smarties and started to act all edgy. The bad kind of edgy, where they start pulling faces and being loud and generally annoying. High point, Billy becoming Jigsaw by falling in the glass crusher. Low point, when Looney Bin Jim starts making intimidating cat noises. Normally I'd move on to discuss the other media the Punisher has been featured in, like the TV series or video games, but I feel like that is enough to do a whole video on, and in all honesty, I'd love to have an excuse to talk about the Punisher again in the future, so don't hold it against me too much, okay? I want to preface this section with 2 points. Point 1. This is not a Punisher problem solely. It's not even a comic book problem only, but it was while reading his comics that I had the lightbulb moment. And point 2. This is not just a man issue, and I am by no means taking away or ignoring the issues about the sexualization of women in Hollywood or comic books. But again, I want to talk about this issue in this video, well, give me a second and you'll understand. Frank Castle, who we know is just a normal dude, right? You know, street level fighter, yes with military training, but a big nope to the superpowers. Right, we're on the same page, good. Check this out. Now, check this out. Remind me again, who is the street level fighter with no superpowers? So Frank is absolutely jacked in the comics, and when it came to the live action leading men, they needed to look the part. I've read quite a bit about the actors and how they bulked up for the role, their workout routines, and hydration, dehydration of themselves. Mostly it boils down to a high protein diet, usually something bland like rice and chicken, up to 8 times a day. No sugar, no cheat days, and twice a day they head down to the gym to pump some serious iron. In thomasjane's case, he was training for 6 months to prepare for the part. Lots of martial arts training, gun training, even philosophy of war and the warrior's mindset like that of the Japanese samurai was researched, on top of the diet and gym cycle. It's not just the Punisher though. Actor Chris Hemsworth put on 20 pounds of muscle in 8 months for his portrayal of Thor. Chris Evans complained of constantly being full of rice and chicken for his role as Captain America. Chris Pratt additionally had to drink an ounce of water a day for every pound he weighed, which is way over the recommended intake, to prepare for his role in Guardians of the Galaxy. Even Sebastian Stan, Robert Downey Jr. and Paul Rudd felt pressured into bulking up for their roles, whether they needed to by the studio or not. Another trick actors use is to hit the gym or do push-ups just before the topless scenes are shot. What you see on screen is not their resting body shape, but hyper dehydrated and after being pumped up. Not even mentioning photoshopping or lighting effects. Don't get me wrong, I love comic books. I love the movies with the big guys and the loud guns. It's something I won't stop loving because it's part of who I am, but I can't pretend it hasn't affected me. Being real. Behind this mask is a man who has had problems. I've never been a big guy. I will probably never be a big guy. But something I learned about myself was that in the chaos of growing up as a teenager, I could control one aspect. I could choose if or not to eat. The less I ate, the less I wanted to eat. I rapidly lost weight and honestly, I didn't notice. People around me noticed, but I didn't see what they all saw. At my worst, I remember being at the hospital and being told I had to put on weight. I was 4.5 stone and I was at my full adult height. I was gaunt and skeletal, and yet I didn't see it. I had actually gotten to the point of disliking the feeling of food in my mouth, and the sound of others eating made me feel physically sick. I had to do something or my body would just shut down. Now this isn't a pity party or woe is me or anything like that, but I feel that it needs to be said. I'm not alone in this, and I know that, but boys are told to just get up when they get hurt, don't cry and bottle up their emotions. Walk big, protect your little brother or sister. Boys are taught to play rough. That's how boys grow up to be men. So, how many young men look up to these movie stars, these comic book heroes, and that becomes a large part of what a man looks like to them. To be a man, they must achieve that look, and the more they look like that, the more of a man they are. Again, I know this is not unique to men, but it seems that men don't talk about it.
If you, or anyone you know, have struggled with anything we've talked about today, there are links in the description with more information on how you can access support. It was eye-opening for me when researching this to discover just how much these issues affect even the perceived perfectly polished celebrity. But they are human too, and we all need help from time to time.
If you're interested in this topic, I've added a couple of links to some articles I found interesting about the Marvel movie carousel and the men and women who portray those superheroes and what they go through for their art. So why did I want to share this in a Punisher video? Well, when I remember that Frank is supposed to be a regular person, no superhero powers buffing him up to unachievable levels, and yet he's drawn and portrayed in live action to an almost impossible body type. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, it's one of the more disappointing aspects to the Punisher, that he's not always visually as relatable as his character is written to be. And whilst his body type isn't necessarily a widely discussed controversy, here's one that was. The Punisher has gone through hell and back emotionally, and at times has teetered on being considered crazy, but his deeply disturbed history has always driven and reinforced his moral code and behaviours. Unfortunately, in 2017, a Kentucky police force placed Punisher skulls on the hoods of their squad cars, and from there, other military organisations and groups of conspiracy theorists started using the symbol. The skull was used as a symbol of force, and even made its way to the George Floyd protests, being worn by law enforcement officers. Jerry Conway openly stated that the use of the logo enraged and embarrassed him. On the subject, Conway said, "The Punisher is representative of the failure of law and order to address the concerns of the people who feel abandoned by the legal system. It's always struck me as stupid and ironic that members of the police are embracing what is fundamentally an outlaw symbol." Conway expressed in an interview that many genuine fans of the Punisher were people of colour from marginalised communities. They identified with Frank over the idea of being abandoned. Conway responded, "I want to deny police and militia and the military the opportunity to use this as a symbol of oppression." He launched a t-shirt design initiative called Skulls for Justice, a crowdsourcing of artwork from people of colour that incorporated the Punisher skull with Black Lives Matter themes. 100% of the money raised went to Black Lives Matter, which according to the website totaled $77,990. Before we get into the alternate reality, how do you think this video connects with the last? What links the Punisher and Pyramid Head? Answers in the comments. What if Frank got superpowers? Would he go power mad? Frank has a strict set of morals he holds himself to, but that's from a normal and human point of view. What if he had powers? Sure, there have been occasions that the Punisher has had superpowers or gear like the War Machine getup, but what I'm thinking about is, what if he started off with powers? Would his morals reflect this? Punisher was born out of anguish, the death of Frank's family, and so his morals revolve around protecting the innocent and avenging the unjustly dead. If he was a Superman-like character, he wouldn't have had the spark that set him on his murderous rampage through New York's dark underbelly. So, would he have been a hero at all? Maybe the temptation would have been too much, and he would have gone down a darker path, maybe becoming a villain. I mean, he's got an obsessive personality, and when he fixates on something, well, come hell or high water, he's going to get it. Maybe that would be too far, and maybe he would never turn to the dark side, but perhaps he would go too far the other way, and judge us all as wicked for the smallest things. Perfection would be the only good, and everything other than that would be bad, evil, something worth punishing. What do you think? Could Frank hold his ego in check? Would he succumb to the temptation? Please let me know in the comments. This is something I keep coming back to while I wrote this script, and I found the what ifs so fascinating. Thanks for coming along for the ride with me on this one. The Punisher, his brutality and his morals are something I'm drawn to. By his own standards, he knows what he does is wrong, and yet does it anyway for the greater good. And I find that duality way more interesting than any rippling physique and spandex. I never started this script thinking I'd talk about comic book physiques, or about the effect Hollywood has on a young man's mind. Usually, when we talk about the corruption of self-image, it's from a young woman's perspective. And that's totally valid and important, but I mean, that will be something we talk about in another video soon. Watch this space. As this is something that affects me, I feel it's something worth talking about. It's not just young women who suffer from body dysmorphia, bulimia, anorexia, and a plethora of other self-image disorders. But hey, let's not get too heavy with it. I hope you enjoyed my take on the Punisher and Punisher-related things. If you enjoyed my video, I hope you come back again and see whatever else I've done and do. We have some really interesting stuff coming up, and I'd love to know what you think. And so, with all that said, thank you for your time, I wish you a good day, and many more besides. Yours, forever in horror, 226.
So, no matter how much I learned, looked, or screamed his name, I just couldn't pin down this Punisher man. Looks like I'd have to let down this little missy and skip this paycheck. But at least I know if I ever fell on the wrong side of the law, this Punisher man would be waiting to set me straight. And that goes for you too, Kieran. I'm watching you.